I've already done an old episode on Tom. It was actually the first episode ever that I made years ago. What Kind of Music was a recent collaborative album released by Tom, a producer, guitarist and singer-songwriter, along with one of the finest modern jazz drummers, Yussef Dayes. January 6th, 1939, a passionate jazz fan named Alfred Lyon produced a recording session in New York City with two boogie-woogie pianists, founding what would become one of the most respected and longest-running jazz labels in the world, Blue Note Records. Blue Note's legendary catalogue traces the entire history of the music from hot jazz, boogie-woogie and swing through bebop, hard bop, post-bop, soul jazz, avant-garde and fusion, and into the diverse and vibrant sounds of today. I'll be covering Blue Note in an episode later down the line, but know that What Kind of Music was an album published by this label and is also not necessarily a jazz album. In the past, as Red Bull stated, Yussef Dayes was a half of Yussef Kamaal alongside producer Kamaal Williams. They were responsible for Black Focus, one of the highest profile British jazz records of the decade, an album that escaped the genre siloing that jazz so often endures, thanks in part to its seamless mingling of a variety of the genre's traditions, along with some of the tics and motifs of broken beat, house and even garage. Excluding Virgil Abloh, other people that Yussef is connected with musically include Terrace Martin, Jahan Sweet, Kamasi Washington, Tom Misch and Sampha. He says the best part of being an artist is that moment when your creations you've been working on goes out to the world for people to enjoy and be inspired by. Now, Tom's made quite a few nice projects. The warm simplicity of Beat Tape 2, the meandering journey that is Geography, and now this new project, What Kind of Music, delves into and demonstrates a more mature Tom. One who's willing to experiment with a new bravery. For many listeners, as Sun Genre said, What Kind of Music, while jazzy, will not be strictly considered a jazz release. Yussef and Tom grew up in the same area, and he basically met him at the launch party of his debut album, Geography. He said that they had to go into the studio together, and they did, and it was that simple. Tom says that from the moment that they were together in the studio, there was a good connection, musically speaking, and they just kept making stuff impromptu. The album What Kind of Music came out organically from a lot of improv sessions. And I'm going to quote Jazz Aspen here. A jazz musician is creating spontaneous art every time he or she plays music. In fact, spontaneity has always characterized jazz music's finest improvisers. But there's more to jazz than just improvisation. Composers such as Duke Ellington and Charles Mingus wrote occasional jazz compositions practically devoid of improvisation. The real challenge comes when a composer integrates improvisation into a piece, merging jazz composition and improvisation in the act of creativity. Coleman Hawkins' Body and Soul or Thelonious Monk's Straight, No Chaser are sophisticated compositions built from the improvised line. One example of this is the song Kyiv, which Misch and Dayes recorded while visiting Ukraine to shoot music videos for the album. And they then said, have a jam, we're going to film it. And Kyiv was the outcome of that jam, he says. It's a fully improvised piece of music that came out from having that last bit of film on the roll. Tom has this really important quote on the Line of Best Fits interview. You could say this record isn't really a jazz record. The record that me and Yussef have made, it's inspired by jazz because it has elements of improvisation and the freedom of jazz. But it's not at all traditional jazz. I think it's just music, Dayes weighs in. I suppose that's where the name of the album comes from. People can just interpret the music how they want to. One day it might start with me playing a synth part, and then it might lead to Yussef doing something on the drums or vice versa. Yussef might be messing around on this little synth called the OP1 that we used on the record a lot. So it was day to day really. We had the studio booked out for like a month and we'd go in one day and just vibe out. What's interesting is the Gibbs collab, which Dayes actually pushed. Quoting him, I've been sending beats to Freddie for the last year or so, him and his manager, explains Dayes. Just going back and forth. So I sent him this track that I was working on with Tom and he jumped on it, man, and finessed it. I linked up with Freddie and Madlib in LA last summer and just got to chill with them and see them perform live. And from there, hopefully we've got more music coming. Naro Expanded Cinema talks greatly about the feel and the reason of jazz, the pursuit of musical freedom, the search for a balance between art and commerce, and the belief in music as a transformative and revolutionary force. The more we learn about the lineage of jazz, the better we can understand and hear the music, and the more we can appreciate the diversity, the intimacy of great jazz. Okay, just because what kind of music isn't jazz doesn't mean it can't sit proudly amongst other Blue Notes releases. Clash Music actually really said it best. What kind of music is the product of curiosity? Is the kind of record you should recognize for its simplicity, a fleeting crossover between two musicians just trying to find their groove. As both musicians point out, the main motivation was self-expression. This is one step in that evolving process.